still running. Stop it, please. For God's sake, please stop it. There's no more time. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
Cześć, witam, dzień dobry. What's up? This is Mike. Today I would like to talk about the 5 things you might find to be useful as a foreigner if you're considering moving to Poland temporarily or permanently, whether or not you decide to buy a flat or an apartment or buy a house. These are the things that I found over the 8 years of me living here. These are the things that I have found to be the most useful. So I'm going to share these with you, and hopefully the information I give you today starts you on the right track to your journey if you're considering moving to Poland. So number 1 for me is transport and proximity to transport. I live in the city center of Poznan. The city contains about, I would say, roughly a little bit over 500,000 people. So it's not a large city in terms of scale of Warsaw. I would put it on par with Wrocław. Torun is much smaller. So I would say Poznan is probably the 3rd or 4th largest city. No, I would say it's probably the 4th or 5th largest city in Poland. And I can tell you, I live on a main street right here, and the transportation systems here are amazing. The public transportation is reliable, it's timely, but the dark side of that is they start running really early. So what I would say is these 5 things that I would like to say about the noise and what you should know before you rent or buy an apartment here in Poland. The trams on my particular street, they begin running at around 4:30 or 4:45 in the morning. Check the proximity of that apartment in relation to the tram, because the trams are noisy. They start their routes really early, so this could create some problems for you if you have issues sleeping or if you have some sensitivity to noise. I didn't know that at first because I was just attracted to it, because nobody wants to walk long distances to public transportation. So I looked at it in the past as a bonus. But now that I've been acquainted now in Poland for 8 years and I've lived at this location for the last 4, I can tell you I regret my particular purchase. And if I had to do it over, and this is where I would advise you if you're thinking about moving to Poland, you should really check your proximity between your apartment and the tram tracks, because there's a lot of vibration. These trams run, as I said, really early in the morning all the way into the late hours of the night. So we're talking sometimes 1 in the morning. They run less frequently the later it gets, but still you have to consider you will hear these trams at 4:45, 5 in the morning up until midnight, if not 1 o'clock in the morning. So that would be number 1, the apartment you might be looking at and the proximity to the tram and the tram tracks. So number 2 would be finding out who your neighbors are. And what do I mean by that? In Poland, a lot of buildings are designated for mixed use. What that means is you could be a tenant here, a resident here, but your building could also be used for short-term rentals. You could have a nail salon. You could be a masseuse. Mixed use buildings are something legal here. And although you might look at it from an unethical standpoint, it is legal here. In my opinion, if I had to do it over again, I would like to live in a building that is probably more occupied by full-time residents and elderly people, because I live in the city center, and because I'm in the city of Poznan, there are a lot of universities around here. And because of that, a lot of people rely on these apartments in the city center for short-term rentals. It's a good way for Polish people, investors, to make a lot of money. You can earn a lot of money if you own multiple flats. So what I would say here, in my particular case, if you can, or if you have somebody who can represent you, find out who's living across from you, find out who lives above you, and find out who lives beneath you. And if you have a common wall, also that could be something important you should look out for. Maybe not the most in terms of the common wall, because the buildings, I would say, are built relatively good here. If you compare them to the United States, where we have just wooden beams, 2x4s, and drywall, there's a lot of brick and concrete that are used here in most buildings. I would say 99.9% of the buildings are generally with brick. So in my case, I find it really difficult. I'm like PTSD at this point because I've been in this building for 4 years.
Get me up. I'm gonna be sick.
So for me, it's very important to know my neighbors, which I can at this point because it's just people own multiple units here. So for you, the foreigner who might be considering moving to Poland or rent a flat in Poland, please check your neighbors, because every year I have a new set of neighbors with different sets of tendencies, and I could never really fully adapt to their tendencies and their schedules. So what you would like to do is ask the owner who you might potentially rent from. Ask them the demographics of the building. Ask them if they're used for short-term rentals, long-term rentals. Also, Booking.com is very popular here, so people across from me have about 4 units, and again, because it's spring and approaching summer, for sure I can expect parties on the balcony, people smoking marijuana. You know, as I said, I've lived life, but as you get older, living in the city center becomes less and less attractive. So number 3 is pretty much on par with number 2. If you're thinking about living in Poland, especially in the city center, check out the neighborhood. Not only do you want to check for your neighbors and who your neighbors are and the proximity of the tram and noise, you also want to check out the local neighborhood and what might be in the proximity of your apartment. You definitely do not want to live in a district that is full of clubs and pubs. These clubs go on until 4, 5, 6 in the morning sometimes. If you're thinking long term, and this is not a place for an investment, please consider this number 3, looking at the local neighborhood and the lifestyle of the neighborhoods. I don't know if I've become really noise sensitive, because I like to think I've come from a city like Los Angeles that has 10, 12, 13 million people. So I'm used to noise. But the way these buildings are constructed, because of this old world architecture, a lot of buildings are built with bricks. And what that does is sometimes it creates this echo chamber, and it creates a lot of reverb. So if some people are walking down the street, which happens often late at night when they're having a good time and they're coming from a club, Polish people, for whatever reason, they like singing and screaming and shouting at the top of their lungs, and that noise travels. And in the summer, when you have your windows open, because it gets really hot here, these apartments get really hot because of the bricks, and you want to have your windows open unless you have air conditioning, this can startle you. People screaming at the top of their lungs at 2 and 3 in the morning can really startle you. People just sing and whistling and singing and cursing. You can hear everything in Poland. So check the proximity, because what happens is in Poland, because of these clubs, a lot of them operate until the wee hours of the night. And because there doesn't seem to be much concern with noise, surprisingly, Polish people have a really high tolerance for noise. And I wasn't expecting that. I thought actually the opposite, that they are orderly to some extent, but when it comes to nightlife, not so concerned. So that would be number 3 for me, checking out the neighborhood and the lifestyle of the neighborhood. You definitely don't want to live around a lot of young people. You don't want to live around a concentration of young people with pubs and bars close by. It is a disaster. Number 4, and it might sound like I'm really repeating myself in terms of my reasons of what to look out for, but I would say this one is really distinct. Number 4, going back to almost number 2 and 3. Number 4 is mixed use buildings and students. Mixed use buildings, what I mean by that is, going back to what I said originally in number 2, a lot of buildings in Poland are designated for mixed use. So what is typical, what you might see here is, if you live in an old building like I do, a kamienica, which is basically a tenement house, something built in the late 19th century, a lot of buildings, the way they're currently designed, usually you will see a tattoo parlor, a nail shop, a hair salon. Those are usually on the ground level of most buildings. But in Poland, a lot of people have their own businesses. There's a lot of entrepreneurialism here. So above me, I can say there's a woman that has a nail salon. Beneath me, I don't know what they do, but apparently women, when they have a lot of extra free time, they just like moving furniture around. And I mean, no disrespect to that, ladies. Apparently, women, when they have too much extra free time, just like moving furniture around, maybe changing the aesthetic of their flat. I don't really know, but I can tell you specifically when it relates to this woman above me, she has a nail salon. So there's a lot of foot traffic in the stairwell. She has a lot of turnover. So what that has meant for me is I have a lot of people knocking on my door. I've had a lot of people trying to enter my building, my unit. I've had the handle on my door broken once just because the amount of people that repeatedly trying to enter the building, they're pulling, yanking on the doors. So if we talk about my building, I have 38 units. On the other side, I would say a majority of those units are primarily used for attorneys. I live across the street from the courthouse here in Poznan, so there are a lot of attorneys that rent units here, and these are really ideal tenants because they're only here for a short amount of time and they go home at night. But on the downside, we have a lot of university students that use this building as short-term rental while they're pursuing their degrees. So it would be in your best interest to find out who occupies the building, what it's used for, the noise, the parties, short-term rentals, booking.com, Airbnb. So over my 4 years here and the 38 units here, I only know one neighbor. And that one neighbor is the person that likes to move furniture around at all hours of the day. So this is something you might find useful, and it's something you should consider. Really do your homework, do your due diligence, find out the population of the building, because it will cost you in the end if you're thinking about long-term residency here. The fifth one and last one, which I don't know if it's so important, but it is for me because right now it's spring in Poland. Spring, the transition from winter to spring is gradual, so it doesn't happen overnight. You don't get these extreme heat changes from winter where it's, -10 and then it's spring and suddenly it's 50 and 60 degrees outside. It happens really gradually. And what that means for you is when you live in a building like I do, where there's multiple units, more times than not, it doesn't matter if you're in a city center, it doesn't matter if you're in the outskirts of the city, these buildings are managed by some type of administrator, whether or not it's a city, whether or not it's a private company. My building is managed by a private company, and what they do is at a certain point, they cut off the heating. So at night in spring, it still gets cold here. Last night it was 42 degrees. That might be okay for Polish people, but when you're coming from California, 42 is 42. That's relatively cold. And because, as I said, because of the architecture here, the bricks, the concrete, it gets really cold. So either these buildings get extremely cold in the winter or they're really warm in the summer because just the brick. Brick holds a lot of heat, but it also gets really cold. This is something to look out for, I would say, depending on what your plan is long term. If you want to live in Poland long term, really consider thinking about whether or not you want to live in an apartment, and if moving into a home would be breaking the bank for you or a deal breaker, because in my opinion, if I could do it over again, unfortunately, there are no homes in the city center. There's mostly just apartments and flats, what they call them. So if your building is managed by some type of administrator, which more times than not it is going to be, you don't have this access in terms of an individual to control the heating in your own building. Depending on what the HOA decides, when they determine that the weather's good enough, they will cut off the heating of the building, and you will be stuck sometimes a few months prior to entering summer where you'll just be cold. You don't have the opportunity to heat your own apartment. So that would be the fifth one, I would say, making sure you make a decision that's good for yourself and your family. You do not have control of your own individual heating. So you might need to go to Castorama, Leroy Merlin. You might need to buy an electric heater even in spring, because as I said, the seasons here change gradually. So it doesn't get just from extreme cold to extreme warmth. So that would be my last and fifth thing I would say. You do not have any control over the heat or the heating of the inside of your buildings. So those would be my 5 things. If you like this content and you find it to be useful, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like bell, and I'll see you on the next one. This is Mike. Cześć.